the moment, and I'm delighted to say Samuel Lukchurst is back with us. Samuel, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Good morning. Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on again.
A nice quiet time in the Manchester United beat where Ronaldo's hip flexor is the biggest story in world football, and he comes back and scores a hat-trick, and then today it turns out that they're thinking about knocking down the stadium, and then there's the small matter of the Champions League game against Atletico Madrid. Do you ever sleep, I wonder?
Well, it's been nice in a way that Chelsea have dominated the news cycle, but obviously for ourselves, it's never quiet. It's pretty much like New York, really. It's like the club that never sleeps. There's always something going on with Ronaldo. I think it was maybe overstated. I think people just saw the name and saw the issue and saw the result against City and wanted to run with that. It was interesting that there was no context provided that he missed 2 games in January against Aston Villa with a hip flexor. He's since turned 37. If you've got a problem with your hip at that age, it's bound to it's bound to take its toll. But the way he came back at the weekend was pretty spectacular. But I was quite taken aback by the sheer lack of gratitude that Rangnick showed for Ronaldo, which kind of confirms or certainly tallies with what a lot of us have been told and have written about Rangnick having reservations about Ronaldo's role going into next season. And then, of course, the stadium story that was done by a couple of colleagues. United downplayed that rather consciously. There seems to be a new attempt by United to try and downplay anything that gets written about them at the moment, which I don't think is necessarily the right tactic or the way to go with it. But Old Trafford, if anyone's been there in the last 10 years, it's a decrepit stadium. It's been neglected. It's not been expanded once since the Glazer family took ownership of it. The quadrants were installed in 2006, a year after the Glazers completed their takeover. But that planning permission was given, I think, in 2004. So that was about a year before the Glazers took over the club. And Joel Glazer, whose name appears in the programme every week or every other week as co-chairman, has not been at Old Trafford for almost 3 years. And of course, we had Tom Brady in the director's box at the weekend, and he's still with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I think he's attended as many games at Old Trafford in the last 2.5 years as the 6 Glazer siblings have combined.
I was going to ask, because so the NFL media that I cover, that I follow, covered that appearance of Brady as like some kind of personal plea from him to the Glazers. I kind of just assumed that meant somebody was there, somebody was actually meeting him, and that was kind of because he announced that he was coming back after, like, late night our time, but after the game.
Yeah.
I had assumed that he'd met somebody at the ground to kind of finally confirm something, it was just a jolly. There was nobody there. There were no officials from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Glazers at the club, it seems now.
As far as I could tell, there weren't. He tweeted his thanks to the Glazer family, I think a few hours before he announced that he hadn't retired. But it's not a surprise not to see a Glazer at Old Trafford. I think the only time any of them have been there this season was Avram Glazer for Ronaldo's second debut, unsurprisingly. As I said, I don't think Joel Glazer has been at Old Trafford or been to a United game full stop since the Champions League quarter-final at home to Barcelona in 2019. That was in April, so that is almost 3 years ago. The other siblings, you just don't... Some of them have literally never, ever been to Manchester. I think in the early days, Brian Glazer went to a few games, but I mean, it must have been maybe 10 years since he was last at a United game. It's mainly Avram Glazer and Joel Glazer who are the face of the family's ownership, if you like, yet they very, very rarely fly over to Manchester. And, with the glitterati that are in the director's box, United have not been quite as enthusiastic about that in recent months since the UFC wrestler rather crassly decided to video Sir Alex Ferguson saying what a bad decision it was to drop Cristiano Ronaldo against Everton back in October. So even when they, glad hand these famous faces, or in some case unfamous faces, it can go wrong for United.
Okay, that is interesting. I didn't realise that. The story about knocking down Old Trafford, right? I mean, obviously we see how most of these big tickets items work. A kite gets flown in public, a story gets published, and then you see what the public response is going to be. Will Manchester United fans have a massive backlash against the notion that we could have a new stadium here. We could actually, one of the plans is to have two stadiums, a big one for the men's team and a smaller one for Youth Cup games and for the women's team. It sounds like a really excellent plan and a good use of their resources, and it's forward thinking. Is there so much emotional attachment to the specifics of the stadium as it stands now that idea might not fly with the fans?
I wouldn't necessarily say so, because I think the fans have just got fed up and tired with the state of the stadium. The stadium is an embarrassment. When certain players, esteemed players, go there for the first time, they might tweet about how wonderful it is to be there. I remember Dybala did that a few seasons ago because he'd never played there, and he scored for Juventus. And there is still prestige of playing at Old Trafford. People still use the nickname the Theatre of Dreams. It's not to my taste, but it's certainly, it kind of chimes with the romance of football. But you're lucky if you go there these days and you see that the paintwork has been updated. The roof in the south stand where we sit in the press box has been notorious for leaking. I mean, it's some of this is really easy at times. You talk about the leaks from the dressing room, the leaks from the roof, and it all comes together. The most infamous one being, I think, a couple of years ago, just before the derby, but that wasn't in the south stand. That was in the Stretford end. It was like it was just like a waterfall that was gushing down from the roof, and I think it was referred to on the fans forum. But even on that, they actually referred to the wrong roof. They were going on about the south stand because they just assume it's always the south stand that leaks, but it wasn't. It was the Stretford end's roof. So as emotionally attached and as wonderful as it is still walking through Old Trafford, which is one of those few stadiums, I suppose, where you still feel the history of it. You see the Munich clock outside. You go through the Munich tunnel, which is a very dignified tribute to the Munich air disaster in 1958. And you see the Sir Matt Busby statue, the Trinity statue. Ferguson's got a statue as well. It is, you can't help but be impressed by aspects of that. But you go inside it, and compared to Tottenham Stadium, it's shameful, really. And it's not just Tottenham Stadium. We haven't been to Atletico Madrid Stadium again a few weeks ago. That's far superior than United's. They've been left behind. Liverpool have an impressive new stand. Arsenal Stadium, it's starting to look a little bit dated, but it's still a lot more recent than Old Trafford. Manchester City, I suppose, is the most galling example. What they've done there in that region, it's an Edison goal kick away from the Etihad. You've got the CFA where the academy and the women's team play, whereas United's women's team and academy, also their junior teams, still have to play at Leigh Sports Village, where access to it is, you have to get there by car, really. The tram doesn't go that far. There's not a nearby railway station. So it's pretty embarrassing that they still have to pretty much go to a rugby town to play junior football or women's football.
So all of this is actually fixable and might be the type of thing that would get fans on side if they were to maintain the bits that you've spoken about, which I presume they will, and then say this is going to be the shiny new edifice of the stadium. Is there any sense yet, there's stories in the back of the paper today linking Pochettino and Harry Kane, is there any sense that we're rounding out the short list of candidates, that everybody who wants to put their hat in the ring for the job has put their hat in the ring for the job, or are they going to wait until the summer and see who's actually available?
At this stage, I'd still be amazed if it is anyone other than Pochettino or Ten Hag. Pochettino seems eminently attainable, especially given the result that PSG had last week. He wants to be in England. He wants to manage United. That's been the case for a long, long time now. PSG, you hear the sounds coming out from there. It doesn't seem like it's going to extend into next season. It seems like everybody would be very surprised if Pochettino is still at PSG. Apparently, he still lives in a hotel in Paris as well, which, from experience covering United with Jose Mourinho, that is just, it's short-termism, just looking at it from the outside, but from the inside, it's not particularly appreciated. I think with Pochettino, the problem he had was that he waited such a long time. And United did approach him informally at one point. During those 13 months he was out of work, they didn't go far enough. By the time that PSG had sacked Thomas Tuchel, I think he'd been out of work for 13 months. He was impatient. He was ready to get back into it. When he left Tottenham, there were one of three clubs he was going to go to. The other two possibilities would have been Real Madrid and United. it was either going to be those two or PSG. He ended up at PSG. It's not really working out. I think the fact that he's ended his trophy drought is rather insignificant. Even if they win Liga this season, I don't think anybody's going to bat an eyelid about that. But ultimately, United need someone who's going to be credible enough to compete with Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola. And with Pochettino, it is just about believable, even though his aura as a coach has maybe been diminishing in the last 3 or 4 years. I certainly think that Tottenham team that he had probably peaked in 2017. So you're looking at best part of 3 years before he actually was sacked by Daniel Levy. But he's just more suitable for United in that he's got Premier League experience. He wants that job. I think with Ten Hag, there's a hell of a lot more risk. People in Holland have always expected that he would move to Germany first and coach a club there before possibly moving on to England. The prospects of him going to United, where there is a rebuild job required in the summer, where you might not have Champions League football next season, having done what he's done at Ajax, I just think is too steep. He has assembled 2 very good Ajax teams, but you look at those Ajax teams, both of them, the pivotal players in them, or some of the pivotal players, are Premier League rejects. Dusan Tadic has done it for both teams. You've got Sebastian Haller, who is doing very well for Ajax at the moment. Daley Blind was probably a better United player than a lot of people gave him credit for. But the standard in the Eredivisie is so much lower. And also in the Eredivisie, Ajax are only 2 points clear of PSV Eindhoven. It's not an absolute certainty they'll win that league. It's not an absolute certainty they'll get in the quarterfinals of the Champions League either, given the scoreline with Benfica. So I think there are a lot more caveats with Ten Hag. And also, if you are Ten Hag, it might be more logical to keep your powder dry for another year and then take over at Manchester City, where the structure, the squad is so much more stable and there's so much more ready-made for him to go in there and be successful, especially where you look at City, they've got that Barcelona strand in the background with Chiqui Begiristain and Ferran Soriano, obviously Guardiola as well. And one of the biggest influences on Barcelona in the last 50 or 60 years was Johan Cruyff, who was, of course, schooled by Ajax. So I still think that Ten Hag would be a hell of a lot more suitable for City if or when Pep Guardiola does decide to leave when his contract expires in 2023.
You mentioned there that the new Manchester United manager is going to have a central part in this rebuild from this summer onwards, and as you say, it may not involve Champions League football. Where are Manchester United at the moment in terms of planning for that rebuild? Because like you see stories coming out last week about Arsenal and them even trying to plan a squad overhaul again this summer, even if they get Champions League football. With all the leaks from Manchester United, there's no sense that plans are afoot to get that rebuild going, because you'd suspect that transfer plans would want to be at least sketched out at this point in the season.
They would prefer to have the manager in place before the end of the season, whether it's an official announcement, an informal agreement, a gentleman's agreement. They would just rather know certainty who their manager is going to be for next season. But they are compromised by the fact that Champions League qualification is far from a certainty. If they do get it, I suspect it will be in the last weeks of the season. You don't see United coming anywhere near to boxing off Champions League qualification with games to spare. You go back to Mourinho's first season there. I mean, they finished sixth. They only got into the Champions League by winning the Europa League, which was in the final game of the season. He actually compiled 2 separate lists depending on whether they were in the Europa League the next season or the Champions League, because of course it does compromise who you can target. I think in Solskjaer's first summer in 2019, United's pool in the transfer market had not been that low for decades. It was an overestimation to say they had to sign Daniel James from Swansea, Aaron Wan-Bissaka from Crystal Palace. Harry Maguire came in from Leicester, who were probably a bottom half table side at that point, maybe a little bit high up, but they'd not long got rid of Claude Puel, and Brendan Rodgers had only got his feet under the table there. So that restricted United who they could target in terms of a marquee defender. And they needed a big money central defensive signing that summer. They were never going to get Matthijs de Ligt because, one, he's represented by Mino Raiola, and secondly, they didn't have Champions League football to offer him. Other options like Kalidou Koulibaly, that was a non-starter just because of how much Napoli were wanting for him. So they were pretty much railroaded into signing Harry Maguire for a world record fee, just because he played for Leicester, and Leicester weren't as fashionable then as they have been in recent years, I suppose. So it's not a great position to be in. I think the next Premier League season begins in 140 odd days or something like that, which really doesn't seem very far away at all. And United have got to cram an awful lot into that, and they're going to have a pretty exhausting pre-season tour as well, by the sound of things, going off to Thailand and Australia. I think that's due to be confirmed soon. So really, they do need to get the manager situation sorted as soon as possible. And I suppose if Ajax do go out in the Champions League tonight, then where it comes down to Pochettino and Ten Hag, you've got two prime candidates there who aren't tied by Champions League football or focusing on the Champions League for the rest of the season, never mind the prospect of possibly meeting United in the knockout stage.
You have to think that if Manchester United is being run properly, they're doing some due diligence on the possibility that Thomas Tuchel might be available in the summer. Is there anything going on that front, and would that be an even better solution than either Poch or Ten Hag?
They wouldn't rule it out. They'd be daft to rule it out. Personally, I think Tuchel blows Pochettino and Ten Hag out of the water. You're also weakening a rival as well if you can convince him to leave Chelsea or prize him away from Chelsea. I suspect he's probably unattainable. Chelsea, with the way it's going with the sanctions, I don't see the government allowing them to go bust. I think it's probably in everyone's interest that a buyer does come in sooner rather than later, provided that the buyer, is pretty palatable, really. I don't think the Premier League wants blood money on its hands anymore. There's been enough of that already. There wasn't enough outrage over the takeover of Newcastle earlier in the season. It's taken a war for us to get to this stage, which, frankly, is pretty embarrassing for English football and pretty shameful. So the identity of the buyer of Chelsea is important on that front. But I mean, there were some reports the other day that Tuchel said he's not going anywhere until the end of the season. He was never going to walk away from Chelsea. It would have been too difficult for that to happen anyway. But I think when you look at what he's done at Chelsea and PSG, when you see him, how he comes across in press conferences as well, which you can never underestimate, he's been very statesmanlike at times. He's certainly handled it a lot better than Eddie Howe has at the weekend with the question he was asked about the 81 executions in Saudi Arabia, and he just said he wanted to stick to football. I think Tuchel has handled the situation, given how fraught this has been for Chelsea, very commendably. And he always struck me as a pretty good option for United when I was sitting in on his press conferences when PSG were playing against United 3 years ago, or start of last season as well. He's won the Champions League. He's probably a more in recent years, he's been more successful than Pochettino. He's got Chelsea to other finals as well. United would probably be a more stable club than Chelsea, but I still suspect that, given the urgency in which they're trying to sort out Chelsea takeover, that the first thing that the new owner would want to do would be to ensure that Tuchel doesn't go anywhere. All
right, Samuel, great to have you with us again. Thanks a million for joining us. Cheers.
Thank you.
That's Samuel Lukchurst there. He's the chief Manchester United writer for the Manchester Evening News, giving us some thoughts on everything but the football tonight. Like, we didn't even get a chance to talk about it. That's how much soap opera there is around Man United at the moment.
Yeah, it does. It just does have the sense of a club that are kind of making it up as they go along. And even the fact that he said there that Jose Mourinho had a plan A and a plan B with regards to qualifying for the Champions League actually seems like pretty good forward planning in the Jose era. So I wonder if they have that under Ranić. I'm not sure.
They must do. There must be, like...
Surely.
Yeah.